Hey everybody. So I'm going to go over some home networking stuff. I'm going to start out with some basics of a typical home network, and then I'll get into my home network and why it is like that. And then I plan to do some other videos where I break my network out into sort of smaller components and just sort of explain some of the other stuff. So let's get started on a typical home network. So basically what you would normally have, you've got some kind of line in. Here in Istanbul, in Turkey, it's normally some form of DSL. So whether that's VDSL or ADSL or ADSL2 or 2 plus or whatever, you've got that coming in on a phone line. Now you might have fiber if you're lucky, in which case if your building's wired for fiber, it would come in, I think, with an Ethernet line. You get fiber to the building, and then the building sort of sends it to the different apartments. But regardless of what you got, the first thing you're going to hit is going to be what's typically referred to as a router. And this thing, actually, I've got one here. I'm going to go over this later on in detail too, because this is the one that I use. Your router serves a couple of different functions. And so the router acts like a modem. It acts like an actual router or a switch where it's sending the information to the different devices. And then it acts like a Wi-Fi access point. So you'll typically hear these just called router normally, but you should know that it's actually got a couple of functions built in. And then there's some other things too. There's a firewall, there's some advanced settings. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into these devices. In a typical home setup, you've then got some wired connections to some desktop computers that are hooked up to a typical monitor, what would actually be on your desk, and then you've got some Wi-Fi connections that go to things like phones. You've got Wi-Fi connections that go to laptops. Yeah, my pictures are awesome, right? And that's about it. That's a normal, just a really common setup. You've got the one device, and it takes and modulates and demodulates the connection from DSL, from fiber or whatever, and then it routes that internet out to your other devices. And when it's routing it to wireless devices, that's when it acts like a wireless access point. As for a router, it's oftentimes a router and a switch, which if you look at the back of this, I don't know if you can see that, but there's several ports here. So when you look at the back, you'll normally see some connections, and you might have LAN 1, LAN 2, LAN 3, LAN 4, and then oftentimes WAN. Sometimes, however, like in the case of this one, LAN 4 actually is the WAN. And I'll talk about these things in a minute. And then on this particular one, you've also got DSL, which takes a phone line. So LAN is local area network. WAN is wide area network. And then you might see WWAN, wireless wide area network. I'm not sure that that'll matter, but it will matter in later videos. So this will just give you an idea. And the way to think about it, so your LAN is everything that is inside of your network. So like these things here, these are all on the LAN. Get that out of there. These things are all on your LAN. They're all in your local area network. This acts as the device which takes internet in through the WAN port from the wide area network and then sends it out through the LAN or to the LAN to all the other devices. So anyways, let's close this one let's have a look at my particular setup. Get out of here. So one thing you'll notice is I've got a whole bunch of devices, and basically you can kind of ignore this. This is stuff that has to do with the router that I'm using and the setup that I'm using, and basically more or less this right here, this is the back of a computer which acts like a router. So I'll get into that all a little bit later, but let's focus on this part here. So this right here is this device, and basically again, this takes internet in from DSL or from fiber or some other connection, depending on where you are and what your setup looks like. It might be cable, actually, if you're in the United States. Oftentimes the cable companies give you internet, and it converts it into something that can be used, into basically Ethernet. So what I have, again, it's basically just more complicated than what a lot of other people have. I have only one of the ports on here being used, and it's in what's called a DMZ, and this is another feature of most any router, modem, etc. DMZ stands for demilitarized zone. I'm not going to write that. So if you're familiar with the war term that it comes from, demilitarized zone is like the area in between South and North Korea. There's a strip called the DMZ. And basically that's supposed to be like a buffer area in real life. In internet terms, what it means is this device right here, since I've put it into the DMZ, it doesn't use any of the features that this device has. So this device does give it an IP, so it does use the DHCP features, but it doesn't use the firewall, it doesn't use network address translation, anything like that. In other words, you can almost sort of consider it like this isn't there, and like the internet just comes directly into this device, because that's basically what using the DMZ means. And the reason I would want that is this device right here is a Pfsense router. Let's see, this one right here is a Pfsense router, and it acts only as a router. So it does not have the modem features. This one right here, this acts as a modem, which again, modem is modulator, demodulator. So that one still converts the DSL, fiber, or cable into Ethernet, but it doesn't block or stop or do any safety things or anything like that. Once it converts it from the phone cable to the Ethernet cable, it sends it directly to the router. And this is a router and a switch. So on the back of here, it's got multiple ports out. And one of those ports goes to another switch right here, and then off of that switch it goes to the wireless access point right here. So this is actually my Wi-Fi AP. So in other words, what I've done is I've taken this device right here, which would serve several functions, and I've sort of split it up. So now this only acts as the modem. I've got routing and the firewall and DHCP and DNS and all of these other features here in this Pfsense router / switch. And then out of that switch, it goes to this other switch, which just gives me more ports. This one here has five or six ports right now. This gives me another 8, and there's no management there. And then from there, it goes to a Wi-Fi access point. Now, the Wi-Fi access point is basically another one of these, but with all of the other stuff turned off. So firewall and all of that still turned off. It only acts to send the internet out, and it does have the features for a password for your Wi-Fi as well. But what I'm doing is splitting up the roles, and so that no one device has a ton of load on it. Basically, since it's doing 1/3 of the work that it would normally do, it does it much more easily, much more effectively. And then this router switch is actually a complete computer. So it's a regular x86 computer. It's got a Core i3 with 4 gigabytes of memory, and it's got like a 250 gig hard drive or something, and then several ports out of it, several Ethernet ports. So this right here is much, much faster than this, or basically any typical Wi-Fi router or access point or normal router or switch. These things run off chips that are basically the same as what you would have in a tablet or a phone, but actually even slower and weaker. Whereas this one right here is a full-blown computer. And I can give you an idea of that. So let's see here. So I'm going to show you some images. Again, this is the modem. I'm using this as the modem. Oops. Sorry. In my system. And then, where is it? This is the actual router right here. So, Pfsense, and again, it's a router, it's a switch, it's got the firewall built in, it does DHCP, which is, you don't really need to know, but dynamic host control protocol, something like that. So it gives out IP addresses, and the way to think of it is this is basically the smart device in the system, right? So I've taken this from it being the smart device, and I've dumbed it down, where again it just takes internet in and then sends out Ethernet. And the only real feature that I'm using is the DMZ. It's got a firewall in there. I think it's turned off. It's got Wi-Fi built in. That's turned off. It's got WPS. It's got a bunch of stuff that are just turned off that I'm just not using, because I'm using that pretty much all in here. And then, so if we go back, this right here is the Wi-Fi access point that I'm using. So, oops, I'm going to do that a lot. So this connects with Ethernet to there, not directly, there's a switch, but it connects to there, and this gives out the Wi-Fi. And one of the nice things here, this is new, but the technology is kind of old, so it only goes up to Wi-Fi N, which I think now they're calling Wi-Fi 4, whereas this can do N as well, but it also does Wi-Fi AC. This one here is only 2.4 gigahertz, and this one here does 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So this one's got more wireless power and better range, better antenna. It's just built better overall than this one, but I don't want to use, I want to have it split up, and I want to have this Pfsense device in between there because that gives me the advanced features. Now the one thing that I briefly mentioned that I also have in there is just a simple switch, which here we are. Now this device is actually, it actually comes to here and then that goes into there. All that this device does is it takes one input and then gives you 7 outputs from there. And this is a dumb device. There are managed switches that are used in bigger companies and stuff like that, where you can actually go in there and change things around with setup and add like virtual LANs and whatever. But this is just a dumb switch, because all I'm using it for is to give me more ports, more places to plug stuff into. That's it. And one thing to note as well, so this is a gigabit switch. Sorry. Still getting used to writing on this. Gigabit switch. This Wi-Fi AP is also gigabit. The Pfsense Router, as you can suspect, is gigabit. However, this modem, what I'm using for the modem, and this is actually what came from my telco, TTNet, this is actually only fast Ethernet, which is 10/100. So it can do 100 megabits per second, whereas these gigabit ones can do 1,000 megabits per second. And so they can give you 10 times the speed, basically. The other thing what's sort of nice about that is now my entire internal network, so these are all internal only, my entire internal network is gigabit. Now, this connection is only 100 megabits per second, and the internet coming into it is only like 50 megabits per second up, and I think 5 megabits per second down. So it's okay, actually, that this is only 10/100, because if it were gigabit, you wouldn't see any benefit from it. The actual internet coming in there isn't over 100 anyways. It's not a bottleneck, right? So the internet coming in is about 50 megabits per second down and 5 up. So this 100 megabit connection is not a bottleneck, but if I had 100 megabit per second in any of these other places, then it would act as a bottleneck, and so I don't want that. So boy, this is getting messy, huh? Let's see. All right, some other interesting features here. So more or less what I've done is I have prioritized certain things. So this is my server, and this right here, Ubuntu Media Share. That's my server, and that's highly prioritized because that device has my file server on it, my Plex server on it. I had Nextcloud at one point. It can act as a web server. Right now I'm using it as a file server, as a NAS. So I'm going to say NAS, and that stands for Network Attached Storage. And to give you an idea how that works, so it's called Ubuntu Media Share. These are all of the things that I have in my NAS box, and there's a ton of stuff. So I've got a bunch of ebooks, I've got music, I've got adult shows, TV shows, whatever, and I can store all of that stuff. And what's really nice is because it's inside of my network, all of these devices, everything here has access to that file share. So if I want to take, well, for instance, when I bought this phone that I got somewhat recently, this is the Xiaomi Redmi. I connected it to Wi-Fi. I was able to pass the files that I had on here, music files, through the router, through the switch, through the Wi-Fi, into my phone, like that, very quickly. The only bottleneck there was probably the wireless access point, because my phone itself only does wireless N. So that was probably the slowest part of it. The other devices that I've got on here, so I've got this machine that I'm working on right now, which is a workstation, which has 12 cores, 24 threads, 48 gigs of RAM. It's got a good graphics card and decent storage and stuff. And I use this to create lots and lots of virtual machines. So virtual machines are basically when you have an operating system running inside of another operating system. So from this one machine running, I can have maybe 8 different VMs. In other words, I can have a copy of Windows running, Windows 10. I can also have, let's say, another copy of Windows 10 if I want to use it for testing software. I can be running a copy of Linux. I can be running Mac OS on it as well, all at the same exact time. All at the same time. And since I use AnyDesk on my devices, I can then connect to those virtual machines. So from this one computer, if I wanted to turn on 3 or 4 virtual machines, I can have this running Windows 10, I can have this running Mac OS, I can have this running Linux, or I can have this running Mac or Windows or whatever. So that's a whole other story, really. That's something for another video. But this is my virtual machine server, more or less, and it still connects to this for passing information back and forth. But this has the actual machines running on it. Another quick thing about the media share is you'll notice that there are actually 2 pipes going to it, 2 Ethernet cables. These are each 1 gigabit per second, and I'm doing what's called teaming or link aggregation. So since I've got 1 gigabit per second here and 1 gigabit per second here, you can not exactly add them, but you can sort of add the 2 and sort of get 2 gigs per second. Now, all of these other devices, all these other things can only do a max of 1 gigabit per second. So you might say, okay, what good is it to have 2 here? And this is where it's only sort of. So if I'm sharing something from here to here, the maximum speed is 1 gigabit per second. If I'm sharing something from here to here, maximum speed, 1 gigabit per second. But what's nice is I can now share from here to here and here at the same time. And these will both still get 1 gigabit per second. In other words, this one will go to here, that one will go to there. So although it doesn't give you 2 gigabits per second to any one device, it will give you simultaneous 1 gig connections to multiple devices. And since it's my server and it's got all my files and stuff, I wanted it to be high speed. That's got a whole bunch of hard drives, and this one has a 6-core 12-thread processor and 24 gigs of memory and all that stuff. Then off of the dumb switch, I've got an Xbox, which I rarely use it. I wish I had more games, but the last time I bought a game here in Istanbul, it turned out to be in Russian, and so that just annoyed me. And then I have an HP computer, which runs Mac OS. It's a small form factor computer. It's actually, I can show you that one as well. So let's see. HP SFF Hackintosh. So, believe it or not, it is this computer right here. And here's the thing, I know that says HP, and it is HP, but this is actually running Mac OS 10.12. And the reason I've got that is I like to have one computer running Mac, one able to run Windows, and one able to run Linux at any given time, so that if I want to test software, if I want to just use a different operating system, I've got it. And I can't easily do that. Sorry, I can't as easily do that on the workstation. Which, by the way, I'll just toss it in here real quick. This is that big workstation that I've got. This is the one that I use as a virtual machine server. Sorry. And I do other things with it as well, but primarily I use it as a VM server and to test software and stuff like that. And then this right here, this is the Pfsense Router, and as you can see, it's a regular computer. But because I've put the Pfsense Router software on there, it acts as a router. All right, let's see, what else? I also have a small form factor Windows 10 Htpc. This is another just small, just Windows 10 computer. And then I have some other things that are wireless, and this is just a Dell laptop that I have sitting next to me here that's hardwired right now. And the other nice thing here, using an access point like this, since the access point has a couple of LAN connections on the back, and it's not this exact one, but since it has some extra LAN connections on the back, I can have the internet plugged into the LAN connection here, and then I can use these like they are a switch, which is really nice. Yeah, sorry about that. I had to pause you for a brief minute there. So this is the bulk of what I wanted to show you, because like all of these devices, these are just clients of one form or another. The HTPC is connected to my TV. That's what I use to watch YouTube and Netflix and all that stuff. And then, you know, I'll add and take away other devices. Now I do have some phones which I'll use as security cameras. They're not listed on here because I'm not going to show you that stuff. But yeah, just to sort of wrap stuff up here. Let's see. So this was our sort of simplistic normal system, right? So this is, there we are. So this is a typical system where you've got one router and then you've got your client devices. And basically what I've got the modem going to Pfsense Router, and then I've got that going to an unmanaged switch, and I've got that going to a Wi-Fi access point, and then off of the switch and off of the access point I have some wireless and some wired devices. And this does a lot of the work that would normally be done right here, and these two things do some of the work that would normally be done right here. There's a couple of reasons for that, but again, going back to what I mentioned before, it takes some of the burden, some of the load off of that modem, and so it can make your whole system a bit quicker overall if the modem is your weak spot, at least for sure. Now, there is an added latency, which inside of a home network, it's not a problem for me. You know, when you talk about latency being an issue, you're talking about things like gaming over the network, which I just don't think is great yet, or high frequency trading. They want the lowest latency possible, but this gives me good overall speed. I can still use it for any desk and things like that. And it gives me all of this extra security because Pfsense has a really good firewall. It's much more powerful and much better than what you would get in a router, and I can customize just the hell out of it. There's a ton of stuff I can do with Pfsense that you simply can't do with a regular, just with one of these, you know, run-of-the-mill modem router Wi-Fi AP all-in-one things. And then, of course, I've still got Wi-Fi as well. So you can see they're very different, but of course, you know, the reason for that is I've got a different set of needs from what the average person, you know, might have. So, you know, I've got all of these clients here, and then some, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's why I went with a stronger system, and I like the fact that I can upgrade the router quickly and easily, and I can manage it really closely. So, yeah, that's about it. Next time we'll get into. I think I'm probably going to start by getting into one of these home routers specifically in a little more detail so that you can understand a little bit better what's going on and how to use it and how to access it. And then I'll go from there. I'll probably do a bit about Pfsense, maybe do a bit about the file server that I have and so on. And yeah, we'll see. Anyways, thanks for joining me. I know this video was pretty long. Hopefully you stuck through it and you were all right. So, all right. Have a great day.